Texas. From time to time, we've found exciting partnerships and passionate people. One such person has given us the opportunity recently to up our game in this field. We'd like to introduce you to DeMarcus Ware, Hall of Fame NFL player and current advocate for nutrition for children around the state. DeMarcus has partnered with many organizations in the Dallas area and around Texas to increase awareness of summer meals and help share best practices in the field. He'll be working this summer to do the same and wanted to share an encouraging message to those of us here.
Hi, I'm Pro Football Hall of Famer and Dallas Cowboys sack leader DeMarcus Ware. When I was drafted by the Dallas Cowboys, I knew I wanted to leave a legacy. My NFL career gave me a huge platform. Growing up in a single-parent home in the projects, I was familiar with food insecurities, and honestly, it fueled me to change my situation. I ran through every sliver of a door opening and appreciated every hand that was extended towards me. The Baylor Collaborative are like-minded in their efforts to end hunger in Texas communities. I'm passionate about child nutrition because kids need healthy meals to grow, learn, and thrive. Whether you are an athlete or not, your body and your brain needs proper nutrition, period. Summer is the pregame that builds the right foundation for the school year. Yet, kids are losing access to consistent, nutritious meals. This affects their health, growth, and readiness to learn when the school year begins. When I played, Coach knew who came in prepared from a good summer program and who must catch up. We want to keep these kids ready. We want all the kids and families to find the closest summer meal sites in their area, and we're going to challenge them to go every day so they can fuel up for a great summer. Nobody can end hunger alone. I'm excited to play a big part in tackling, sacking hunger alongside you and the team at the Baylor Collaborative. I want to give a huge thank you to the child nutrition teams and volunteers that make summer meals possible for our Texas kids. The work you do is highly valued, making sure that every person gets the nutrition they need to be the person they were called to be. I cannot wait to meet all of you. I'm giving you a sincere thank you. Peace.
How about that? If you work at all to help keep kids fed in the summer, whether you are personally serving meals or you make sure that programs happen, could you raise your hand? They're already working for this summer, and we're so grateful for you all. Those of you that are in the throes of it know that planning for summer starts prior to Christmas in a lot of ways. And so we're so grateful that people have dedicated themselves to making sure that kids have access to food in the summer months, and hopefully this brings even more excitement to those efforts. Before we get started with tonight's address, I'd like to take a minute to thank two sponsors of the event and partners in our work. One More Child exists to provide Christ-centered services to vulnerable families and children. Their website says that last year they served 250,259 children, and another 143,334 children were impacted through their advocacy, trainings, and awareness. They have been a longtime partner of Baylor's and are an early partner in our expanding global work and an exciting new partner for us at the Collaborative. The Institute for Faith and Learning at Baylor was founded in 1997 to assist Baylor in achieving its mission of integrating academic excellence and Christian commitment, and its goal of becoming a university of the first rank committed to its Baptist and Christian heritage. Since its founding, the Institute has developed several major programs in support of this mission, cultivating high-quality research, sponsoring conferences, mentoring students, and encouraging teaching faithful to the Christian intellectual tradition. One particularly exciting example for the collaborative of the Institute for Faith and Learning's work is their support of Drs. Nathan Alleman, Sarah Madsen, and Kara Clyburn-Allen's book on student hunger. Kara is a former employee of the collaborative, and we're very proud of her work. For those of you local to Waco or sticking around in Waco for an extra day after this conference concludes, we encourage everyone to attend the book launch on April 15th at 4 p.m. in Armstrong Browning Library. We'll make those details available to you in the Whova app. Now, I'd like to invite up our board chair of the Baylor Collaborative on Hunger and Poverty, Desiree Tucker-Serini, to offer a few remarks and introduce Jeremy Everett.
Thank you so much, Grace. This wouldn't be happening without her, I'll tell you. Good evening, even though it's really light outside. It doesn't feel like evening. So what an exciting day it's been already. How many people enjoyed your sessions that you went to today? That's great. So happy to hear that. As a member of the Board of Advocates, I'm just thrilled to see you here, especially during this very uncertain and tumultuous time. You are on the front lines of food security here and around the world. Your collaboration with each other is critical to, as Baylor strives to do, cultivating solutions to end hunger. In the breakout sessions, you have either already met or will meet many of these amazing board members on the Board of Advocates. I am so honored to be on this board with business leaders, bankers, lawyers, former member of Congress, men and women of many different faiths, and experts in the field of food security. It's also very politically diverse. Our goal as a board is to increase funding streams for the remarkable work of the Baylor Collaborative, build awareness of successful programs, and educate state and federal government officials on effective policies. It is now my privilege to introduce Dr. Jeremy Everett, founder and executive director of the Baylor Collaborative on Hunger and Poverty. Many of you already know him and have been his mentor, or maybe you've been mentored by him, including me. Yes, your mentor can be much younger and much taller than you are. Jeremy is the grandson of a Baptist preacher and the son of a Baptist preacher, which makes him a great storyteller, and I believe every single one he's ever told. He has earned his bachelor's degree from Samford University, a Master of Divinity from Truett Seminary at Baylor, and most recently his Doctor of Ministry from Duke Divinity School at Duke University. He was appointed by the U.S. Congress in 2014 to serve on a National Commission on Hunger. Currently, he is the board chair of Bread for the World. He is an author. He wrote, "I Was Hungry, Cultivating Common Ground to End an American Crisis." I highly recommend this book. It really establishes Jeremy's philosophy of collaboration is how we solve this very difficult problem. He's also contributed to several other books, including What Justice Looks Like, and coming in the fall of 2026, his book, The Litmus Test, The Weaponization of Hunger, and the Silence of Christians. Okay, I can already tell it's a bestseller. Amazon's gonna blow up. We're gonna all ask for it now. Jeremy and his 3 sons and wife lived in a food insecure community where they learned the hardships facing so many, including those who held numerous jobs and strived to keep food on the table, pay their rent, and their utility bills. I think this was a big part of what formed Jeremy, but most important, he is a man of principle. His strong moral character and value system make him a great leader of the collaborative. Please welcome Dr. Jeremy Everett.
Well, all right, everybody. It's good to be with you all. As you might notice, I evidently have one shirt, one tie, and one jacket. So for the bosses in the room, give me a raise or something, or a new clip-on tie before I walk up to the stage next time. I am really sorry that you have to see this face that was made for radio in so many different contexts. But great to be with you tonight. I am. We got some ground that we want to cover. We're grateful that DeMarcus Ware provided those remarks. He is going to be an important player, literally and figuratively, in our work to address food insecurity for children, beginning this summer and throughout the years to come. He has identified that this is what he feels called to do with his life. And he said to me and one of my colleagues, Elijah Tanner, I asked him, what is it that when you felt like you were doing the best work, like when you were in the best shape, doing the best work, having your best seasons, what did that look like? And he said, I was always the team captain. And he said, my favorite seasons were when I had all 95 guys working in concert with each other to achieve a common purpose. And he said, now I want to do that and get all my old NFL buddies to do the same thing with Child Hunger. So we are very grateful, that's right, for his leadership. Let's give him a round of applause. He's also still strong as an ox, for the record. So I shook his hand, and my arm, this was 2 months ago, and I still can barely move my arm. He's a strong individual. Well, tonight, I know that we all come from different faith perspectives in this room. Now, a lot of us do come from a Christian perspective, but not everybody here does. We know that there are people from all walks in different religion, all walks of life and different religious traditions. Some that may not come from a religious tradition at all. And so, with that in mind, I want to have a little precursor because I'm going to give a vision for what I think America can look like and be like and what America looks like when it's at its best. I'm also going to be speaking to Christians in the room because unfortunately our Christian brothers and sisters have been purveyors of a lot of injustice that's been happening in our communities, and so I feel like it's something that requires us to address that head on. Now my pastor is here, Eric Howell, so I'm also got years worth of sermons that I've listened to him give that I need to give back to him. So this is going to be particularly directed at him. And one of my doctoral professors, Norman Worsba, who we'll hear from tomorrow night, is also here. And so any theological issue that you have with me, take it up with them. Does that work? Okay. Well, this is a preamble before my minutes actually start, Grace. But I'm operating with a set of assumptions for why you all have showed up to this year's summit. And that is that you all want children to have ample access to food and adults to be able to find work that can sustain a family. I also assume that you believe the process towards these ends does not have to pit us against each other. My assumption is that there seems to be a collective intuition that working together to solve our country's and our world's greatest problems is a better path forward than mean-spiritedness and vitriol that we see from our politicians, our podcast preachers, our political commentators, and endless amounts of social media posts. I'm assuming that you are willing to sit together at the table with all people regardless of ideological division, in order to cultivate trust that will put our nation on a path forward towards economic opportunity for all people and ensure that no one goes hungry. Skyrocketing rates of hunger and malnutrition are a litmus test for both developed nations and developing economies around the world for both the soul of their nation and the strength of their systemic response. Christians and governmental leaders alike can observe that the health and well-being of a society is based upon the severity and prevalence of hunger. Widespread food insecurity is not causal, but the result of other broken social systems. But the results are always the same: growing rates of hunger. Hunger, for better or worse, is a litmus test issue. Since virtually all injustices result in growing rates of hunger, it is a yardstick. It's a litmus test for our world, for our nation, and even our communities. So our litmus test is, how do we create opportunities for all people? Now, I don't assume that all of you understand or know the work of the Baylor Collaborative, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about our methodology. But my hope tonight is that I answer three questions. First, when is America at its best? Second, what is a Christian response to poverty? And third, what can we do about it right now? We're also going to be honoring two of our heroes tonight, Mary Herbert and Bill Ludwig. And I'm going to try not to look at Bill. Mary is at home and is zooming in from San Angelo, Texas. But I already got overclimped just in our pregame meeting before we came out here. And you all know that I am named for the prophet Jeremiah, the weeping prophet. And I have a tendency to get overclimped, so I'm going to try not to look at them. But we are going to hear a little bit about the impact that they have made tonight as well. Well, the Baylor Collaborative on Hunger and Poverty's mission is to cultivate scalable solutions to end hunger. And we do that by combining research with public service and public policy. So essentially what we're looking for is what's working in South Texas that might also work in West Texas or Iowa or Alaska or Guatemala or Honduras or the Sudan. We do that by combining a research team made up of about 50 research fellows and an in-house hunger data lab team with a public service team where we have field representatives around the state of Texas who are working in real time with Texas communities, organizing organizations that are addressing food insecurity, getting to know individuals who are experiencing food insecurity, and trying to develop innovative solutions in local communities to be able to address hunger in a systemic capacity. Ideally, our researchers and our public service team are working hand in hand, and our researchers are evaluating the efficacy of those interventions to help determine what is in fact scalable. Now, our field offices don't do it alone. We also have 28,000 organizational partners around the U.S. and around the world, many of the organizations that are represented here tonight. We all live vicariously through you because of the important work that you're doing in communities on a daily basis. Now, as we are identifying scalable solutions in hunger, we translate that work to policy. So Grace and her team and myself spend a lot of time in Washington, D.C. or in Austin trying to make crooked paths straight that seem to get more crooked by the day in order to ensure that all people would have access to the resources they need to live as God intended. Well, many of you have heard the story of Meals to You, and I'm going to tell the story of Meals to You tonight, but really with the insight of what it took to be able to pull that off from all different sectors. So we have two guiding assumptions. One is that you can't solve a social problem from a distance, that you have to have proximity to the problem, as Brian Stevenson says. And the other that we mentioned this morning, that no one organization or sector can end hunger by themselves. Well, from 2014 to 2016, I had the privilege of serving on the National Commission on Hunger, a 10-member bipartisan commission with 5 Democrats appointed and 5 Republicans appointed. And our job was to travel around the country to find out why we had food insecurity in our nation and what was working to address it, but what we needed to do as a nation to ultimately overcome hunger in a permanent capacity. As I mentioned before, our farmers and ranchers are doing their part. We produce enough food to ensure that no one on this planet should go hungry, yet 40 million Americans regularly are experiencing food insecurity, and 750 million people worldwide are on the cusp of starvation. One of the consistent observations that we made during the commission as we traveled from coast to coast and border to border was that what was working to address hunger in urban and suburban communities didn't translate to rural communities. Simply put, in rural communities, you might have a church, a school, and a post office, but you probably don't have all three. So we noticed that children specifically who were on the free and reduced lunch program in these rural communities didn't have access to a USDA summer meal program because the USDA summer meal program required kids to eat with other kids at what we would call a congregate meal site. That means that kids would have to show up on site and eat with other kids at a designated location that had been approved by, in our case in Texas, the Texas Department of Agriculture, a program that we worked very closely with TDA on for well over a decade to try to increase access to those congregate meal sites. But consistently, we would hear time and again, as would our administrators at TDA, we'd hear from school districts, superintendents that would say, we would love to offer summer meals in our communities, but kids live 45 minutes one direction from our school. There's no possible way that parents can take 2 hours off of work to go back and pick up their kids and take them to a summer meal site so that they can get a meal. The program just didn't work. Well, after my experience on the commission, I came back and I asked our field offices if they were seeing the same thing, and they said absolutely. We went to our researchers to see if evidence supported what we were also seeing and hearing, and they said yes. They said we are seeing higher rates of food insecurity in rural communities and harsher rates of food insecurity in rural communities. So myself and a group of folks went to Washington, D.C. to sit down with USDA to propose a pilot. We said, listen, because of the way that the program is designed, we can't possibly get children to meal programs. Let's see what we can do to get meal programs to children. And USDA partnered with us to launch Meals to You. This was 2019. And so in 2019, literally as the final week of school was letting out, we recruited 20 school districts and 4,000 children to be a part of a 10-week demonstration project where we mailed a week's worth of food every week over that 10-week period to each child participating in the program. So every week on the front porches, a child will walk out on the front porch and will receive 5 breakfasts, 5 lunches, and 5 snacks to get them through the end of the week. By the end of the summer, we had served about 500,000 meals and snacks to kids that had otherwise never received a USDA summer meal program. A few months later, the research report came out and it found that it had equal to or greater impact on childhood food insecurity than the National School Lunch Program, which historically has been the gold standard of addressing child hunger. I got that report the same time that USDA and Congress got that report, and I got a phone call from USDA Undersecretary Brandon Lips, a good friend of us all, who had just heard from Senator Murkowski in Alaska and Governor Lujan Grisham in New Mexico asking us to expand the pilot to their communities. And that seemed like a good idea-ish. I said, Alaska? You know, I was like, how about Arkansas instead? And I was like, it's a whole different kind of rural. That's like setting up a program on another planet. And but he said, have you met Senator Murkowski? And he said, if she asked for it, we're going to do it. And so that was our plan going into 2020. I happened in early March of 2020 to be in D.C., where I was given a series of lectures, and I got a phone call from the Secretary of Agriculture, a guy named Sonny Perdue. When I picked up the phone and he said, we need you to drop what you're doing and come over to the USDA Whitten building, the USDA headquarters right on the mall. Well, I don't know about you all. I'm not Bill Ludwig. I don't get phone calls from the Secretary of Agriculture very often, and ever. And so I assumed, since I am a third-generation preacher's kid, as Desiree pointed out, I was always in trouble. So I assumed that I had done something wrong. And so I caught a cab and I made it down to the Whitten building. When I got there, Brandon Lips, the undersecretary, and his team was waiting there for me as I walked in the door. Again, that was not a normal occurrence. They whisked me back into a conference room and they shut the door behind me and they said, listen, COVID-19 has now spread to New York and we know it's going to be a full-blown pandemic and we're going to have to shut everything down. So schools are going to close and we don't know if it's going to be for 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years. And they said, we've got a plan. We know that kids, that our programs, that our school lunch program, our school breakfast program, after school meal programs, we know that these are a lifeline for children and their families. And so we've got to make sure that when schools close that they still have access to the meals that they need. And we've got a plan for urban and suburban America, but we don't have a plan for rural America. Is there any way that you can scale up your Meals to You program nationwide? Now remember, our mission is to cultivate scalable solutions to end hunger. And I don't know if that was just a bad idea. I blame Grace. We needed to say grace in that moment. And so I said, well, how many kids are you talking about? And he said, probably 25,000 kids. And I was like, oh, that seems doable. 4,000 kids, 25, we built it to scale. I think we can manage that. So I left there, heart still pumping, because I thought I was going to be in trouble, and it didn't seem like I was, at least at that point. So I'm walking back over to my hotel, which is only a few blocks away, and I get into my hotel, and Brandon calls. The undersecretary calls and says, hey, man, it's actually probably going to be more like 50,000 kids. And I'm like, well, I better call Waco. So I called our team to see if this was something that we could undertake, and our team, both enthusiastically and also, I think scared out of their minds, said yes. I called our university administrators, our leadership here, and they were excited that Baylor could play an important role in addressing child hunger in our nation during crunch time. Well, I flew back to Waco. When I got off the plane, I had another phone call from Brandon, and he said, it looks like it's going to be 125,000 kids. The next week, when we launched the program, it was 270,000 children in 43 states, plus Puerto Rico, that were participating in the Meals to You program. Kids were so remote. Wait and see who you're going to clap for here in a second. But kids were so remote in places like Alaska that we literally took seaplanes and boats and barges. It was like the planes were like babushka dolls. Like you get on one big plane to a smaller plane to a smaller plane to get to some of these remote areas. The children at the bottom of the Grand Canyon in the Havasu tribal community received food boxes via mule teams. And then it was UPS drivers and USPS drivers dropping food boxes off everywhere else. So the second summer of the program, we served 40 million meals to kids in Texas and all around the country. And our researchers found that it had 3 times the positive impact for children in these very remote areas on child food insecurity as did the National School Lunch Program. So it became the new gold standard. But what's important about this story? Baylor played a role, and we were grateful that we got to play a role. But we weren't packing the boxes. McLean Global, a food distribution company, Chartwell's, PepsiCo's Food for Good initiative, they all staffed up during the middle of a pandemic to ensure that they could resource all of these children that were needing food during the summer. So they had thousands of people working in manufacturing facilities, boxing up food, putting in notes, even hanging huge banners up in their warehouses about how proud they were that they were getting to show up to work to be able to provide much needed resources to families in a difficult time. We needed Congress to work in a bipartisan capacity. Democrats and Republicans had to come together to be able to pass legislation to make resources available so that we could do this Meals to You pilot. USDA played an incredibly important role. From the design side all the way to the implementation side, we would not have been able to pull this project off without their constant guidance and support. They also opened up the door for us with state agencies. Our state agencies in these 43 states plus Puerto Rico were a lifeline, and they knew their states and their culture. They knew what culturally appropriate foods look like for their communities, and so they made sure that we could provide the food that kids would be wanting to eat and have access to it through trusted partners that they had established for years, decades prior to this intervention. UPS launched a Go Brown program. They recognized that some of these communities were getting more boxes of food in a week than they would typically get boxes delivered in a month or even a year in some of these really remote areas. And so they asked employees to voluntarily move to some of these rural areas in the middle of a pandemic because they knew that children were dependent on these meals. We didn't ask them to do that. They just did it. That is America at its best. I'm reminded of FDR's litmus test for our nation. The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It's whether we provide enough for those who have too little. America is at its best when we prioritize the hurting first. Now, you've probably seen on social media feeds that many Christians have been recently questioning whether empathy is a tenet of our faith. Here's my thought. As legend has it, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. carried a small but powerful book everywhere he went, Jesus and the Disinherited by Howard Thurman. Thurman's message is timeless. He explains that the Bible was written by and for the oppressed, and that Jesus was not a figure of privilege, but a poor Jewish man under Roman occupation. This means that Jesus will always stand with the marginalized, and the place of the marginalized will always be with Jesus. Thurman's book is more than just theology. It's a guide for the oppressed, offering spiritual tools for those who are struggling to survive. One of his key ideas is the image of people whose backs are against the wall, with no other options, just fighting for survival. Jesus, in his teachings, shows what Thurman calls a preferential option for the poor that Heather spoke about today at lunch. In Christian scriptures, we're continually reminded that Jesus saw the poor and disinherited as members of his family, and that providing for the hungry was a litmus test for a faithful life. Blessed are those who are hungry, for they shall be filled. Or I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. Or Jesus broke the fish and the bread, and he made them available for 5,000 people. Jesus even announces it when he states his own calling in Luke chapter 4. He says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." All eyes in the synagogue were fixed on him. Then he began to say to them, "Today the scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." All spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came out of his mouth. And they said, "Isn't this Joseph's son?" This passage gets to the heart of Jesus' call, crucifixion, and resurrection. Jesus is anointed by the Spirit, and his Spirit-led work is to bring good news to the poor. He was declaring that the time for liberation for the impoverished and the oppressed had come, and that this was the year of the Lord's favor, or Jubilee, for people whose backs were against the wall. Now, there are two people that we're celebrating tonight, Mary Herbert and Bill Ludwig, who have demonstrated this kind of commitment to the hungry and have been a guiding light to all of us. I first heard from Mary when Bill and I were launching our hunger-free community coalitions around the state of Texas. We had decided that we would identify 6 pilot communities in Texas where we would launch these hunger-free community coalitions. This was about 2010. Well, after we'd identified the 6, San Angelo, Texas was not one of them. So I got a phone call from Mary Herbert and Carol Hebert from Southland Baptist Church in San Angelo, Texas. And they said, Jeremy, and I knew them because my wife is from San Angelo, and they said, "Jeremy, listen, we just had 3 manufacturing plants close. And so we now have 10,000 children who are on the free and reduced lunch program. We need to be one of the collaborative's pilot communities." Well, I said, unfortunately, at the time we only had a couple of staff, and I said, we've already identified our pilot communities for this year. Maybe call us back next year, And if we have the capacity, we'll onboard your community and make it a part of our next cohort. Well, I don't know if you've met anybody from West Texas, but I'm married to a woman from San Angelo. I should have known that they don't take no for an answer. And so they just assumed, I suppose, their assumptions were that I didn't hear them. So they just repeated what they had said, only louder with more hostility. I said, Jeremy, we have 3 manufacturing plants that just closed, and we now have 10,000 children on our free and reduced lunch program. We need to be a pilot community. I knew I had no chance of getting them off the phone. So I gave them our community assessment tool, an assessment tool that typically takes months for a community to go through and do thoroughly. And essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to find out who's doing what and where are they doing it, where are the gaps of services, what are the resources that are available to the community that you could leverage for the community to be able to create a food secure city. Well, they said thank you, and they hung up, and I thought maybe I wouldn't hear back from them for 6 months or a year. I had no idea. Well, 3 weeks later, I get a phone call, and it's Mary. And Mary said, we've finished the assessment. The mayor and the city council are on board. The school superintendent and the school board are also all in. All of our ministers from all different faith perspectives are in. Our nonprofit directors, our city parks manager, our bankers, I mean, you name it, they are all in. And she said, so now can we be a pilot community? So I laughed and I said, well, I think you already are. So Bill and I made our way out there to go do a town hall like we did in hundreds of communities around the state of Texas. So Bill Ludwig has been a mentor to me and a mentor to a lot of us. Bill served as regional administrator for the USDA Southwest region for decades. And before that, he served in a role in Washington. When I met Bill for the first time, I'm going to digress for a second. I met Bill for the first time when J.C. Dwyer, many of you went to J.C.'s session. J.C. was kind of one of my early tutors in hunger policy. And J.C. and Susie Painter, who really kicked off the work of the collaborative in 2009. The 3 of us went to go meet Bill because Bill had heard about the work of the collaborative through a press release. And so we went into the door, and I had been working and living in low-income communities for 15 years prior to meeting Bill, so I had an assumption that bureaucrats didn't want to really actually do anything to further the cause of food security. And so Bill was not what I expected. So when I walked in the door, Bill, whose top buttons on his shirt have never met each other, was in his tight jeans and boots. And he said, hey, outlaw, y'all come on in and let's figure out how we're going to end hunger in Texas. So I sat down at the table with Bill and his colleagues and began to tell them our plan that was based on a disaster response model through Homeland Security, where we would organize local communities to address food security and have regional coalitions and then statewide collaboration. Bill said, I like it, I'm in. For the next 3 years, Bill and I spent at least 3 days a week on the road going to visit Texas communities. I mean, just community after community, telling them about all of the great resources that USDA had available to them to be able to help them end hunger. Programs like the school breakfast program, programs like the after-school meal program, programs like SNAP. Most of you know this, and so I hope you all know this, that for every dollar that comes into your community through SNAP, it has $1.79 worth of economic stimulative effect. So the city of Waco last year, unfortunately, left $55 million on the table in unused SNAP benefits. That cost our city $90 million worth of economic activity. That by itself would have almost eliminated food insecurity for our city. These are resources that we're all leaving on the table, as well as summer meal resources and so forth. So Bill and I had been championing the cause of these USDA programs and promoting collaboration when we made our way out to San Angelo, Texas. And when we got into the town hall, and we were Tweedledee and Tweedledum. I don't know which one's dumb and D, but I think we probably know who I am. But we did our Bill and Jeremy song and dance, but before we could finish saying our remarks, one of the local religious leaders said, "Hey, we've got a commercial kitchen in our church, so we can make meals for kids in the summer." And another church said, we do too. And then another church said, well, we've got a church van, so we can pick kids up and take them to summer meal sites. And nonprofits in the city parks all said, listen, we've got kids that come on site during the summer. We can offer summer meal sites there. Within just a few hours of planning, this community was ready to rock and roll. And it was all because of the leadership of Mary Herbert. That summer, they served 20,000 meals to kids that first summer of planning. They paid for all those meals through church offering plates. Isn't that incredible? That's right. That's right. Just wait. Since then, they have done 30,000 meals every summer. For 15 years, this community has done this, but they didn't stop there. That wasn't enough. So they did SNAP outreach work in their community. They started community gardening initiatives in areas that were food deserts. You name it, and they did it. And it was all because of leadership, people like Bill and people like Mary. As much as they have done, there is still work to be done. Currently, Texas ranks 49th in food insecurity. 49th. In a state with as much oil revenue as we have, with as much agricultural production as we have, with as many great people like we have in the room today, we rank 49th in food insecurity. That is an abomination. Recently, we've lost thousands of our summer meal sites after COVID-19. And many of our strong nonprofit organizations are no longer with us and operating these kinds of programs or operating in their communities whatsoever. So we have work to do. So here's what we need you to do. We are launching a Hunger-Free Texas campaign. We don't own the campaign. We collectively will own the campaign, but our team will play the role of coordinator. It will be made up of groups like yours and communities like yours, and I need you to do three things. First, organize. Second, utilize. And the third thing is to advocate. Organize the Hunger-Free Community Coalition. It is now easier for you to be able to do that than any time that we had ever imagined 15 years ago when we were going community to community the old school way. Now your community can onboard a Hunger-Free Community Coalition to get all of the important organizations that are addressing these issues working in concert with each other, while also leveraging other organizations that may not have ever addressed food security in their history working alongside you. So we need you to organize one. The second thing, utilize. We still have USDA federal nutrition programs that are strong programs and available to us. Now, candidly, we don't know how jeopardized some of these programs are. We know that some have already been cut. Important programs like the Farm to School program, that is just such an instrumental program that not only helps out local farmers, but gets farm to table food for our low-income students around the state of Texas. So we don't know how long these programs are going to last, but what we do know is that we still have a great school lunch program. We've still got great summer meal programs. We now have more options. One of the great things that came out of the Meals to You project is after we continued to pilot, Grace and her team that work on policy were able to pass legislation to make a non-congregate option available for kids in rural communities in perpetuity. We also were able to pass legislation to create a summer EBT program so kids could receive extra resources on an EBT card so that they could go buy food in their grocery stores. There are resources at the ready, and you also have assets in your community that you likely haven't used for the cause of people that are food insecure. Think about how many churches still have church vans that just sit in the parking lot 6 days a week. those vans can be used to pick up kids and get them to summer meal sites, right? Think about how many organizations that you know are doing incredibly well in your community, businesses that are achieving some of the peak opportunities and capitalizing on opportunities in their community. Leverage them for the benefit of food insecure households. I'll tell you this, when we launched our work doing this hunger-free community platform 15 years ago, Mary was really the architect of it. So she helped us be able to put this down on paper before she ever came to work for us at the Baylor Collaborative. Bill and I had lots of vision, but we needed somebody to help us operationalize that vision, and she did that. But now you've got that resource available to you, and candidly, the need that we are coming upon today is going to be so severe that we have no chance if we don't work together. So in years past, we would often go to communities and say, the Hunger-Free Community Coalitions are an option for you if you feel like this is the best fit for your community. But today I'm telling you, it's your only option. I wish I could tell you that there were more, but we have to create a hunger-free community platform in the state of Texas today. So organize, utilize, advocate. Advocate for programs like summer EBT. Though that exists as federal legislation, our state still has to choose to offer it, and it has not. So join groups like the Texas Food Policy Roundtable, where all of the food advocates in Texas work together on a common legislative agenda to get that across the finishing line. Advocate in Washington for a fully funded SNAP program. That program is the most critical program we have in our country to be able to address hunger, and we need to make sure that it's not cut when the Farm Bill comes up later this year. Now, our team plans to visit all 254 counties over the next 5 years as we launch our Hunger-Free Community Campaign this fall, and it will end in 2030. We also plan to work with all 1,200 school districts. So you can host us or leverage our visit to be able to get in with community organizations that you think have an opportunity to help you create a food secure community. You can certainly take the Hunger-Free Community Certificate course. You can join the Texas Food Policy Roundtable, or go to Washington, D.C. and participate in the Bread for the World's Advocacy Summit this June. Well, I cannot think of two people that have done more or have been committed to the cause of the hungry more than Mary and Bill. Hunger in their communities has been a litmus test for their lives, and they have passed that test with flying colors. But now, upon their retirement from public service, we need you to step up in their place to help us create a hunger-free Texas and ultimately a hunger-free nation. Well, I'm going to leave you with this. I read the text from the Gospel of Luke earlier, but it has a second part. The second part says this: He said to them, "Doubtless you will quote to me this proverb, 'Doctor, cure yourself.' And you will say, 'Do here in your hometown the things that you've heard done in Capernaum.' And he said, 'Truly I tell you, no prophet is accepted in his hometown. But the truth is, there were many widows in Israel in the time of Elijah, when the heaven was shut up for 3 years and 6 months, and there was a severe famine all over the land. Yet Elijah was sent to none of them except for the widow at Zarephath in Sidon. There were also many with skin diseases in Israel at the time of the prophet Elisha, and none of them was cleansed except for Naaman the Syrian.' When they heard this, all in the synagogue were filled with rage, because these were their enemies. They got up and they drove him out of town, leading him to the brow of the hill on which their town was built, so that they might hurl him off a cliff. But he passed through their midst and went on his way." Jesus' hometown crowd believed that God's covenant was exclusively for them, and deliverance was only for them from their oppressors, except that's not what Jesus was proclaiming. Jesus came announcing deliverance, but it wasn't national deliverance. He wasn't promoting an Israel first political agenda. It was instead God's promise of liberation for all the poor, for all the oppressed, regardless of their nationality, their gender, or their race. When the radical inclusiveness of Jesus' announcement became clear to those who were gathered in the synagogue in Nazareth, their commitment to their own community boundaries took precedence over their joy that God had sent a prophet among them. In the end, they were not open to the prospect of others sharing in the bounty of God's deliverance, so they themselves were unable to experience it. Blessed are you who are poor. Blessed are you who hunger now. Blessed are you who weep now. Jesus' allegiance is not to a particular tribe, nation, or religion. His allegiance is to the kingdom of God, to jubilee for the poor, the hungry, and the disinherited, which is so radically inclusive and available to us all that we often reject it because it doesn't fit within orthodoxy as we define it. Those who would exclude others thereby exclude themselves. When we see the poor, hungry, or migrant as other, and when we choose to limit grace to those who meet our standards of deserving, we find ourselves in solidarity with those who tried to push Jesus off a cliff and later placed him on the cross. Jesus couldn't do more for his hometown because they were not open for him. So when we exclude our brothers and sisters because of their nationality, we are among those in the crowd yelling, "Crucify him." We blame the poor for their plight. Crucify him. When we steal from the poor and the hungry to give those who have much, crucify him. How much more might God be able to do with us if we were ready to transcend the boundaries of our tribes, our political parties, our denominations, and our limitations of love that we ourselves have constructed. It may be Good Friday in America right now, but we all know that isn't the end of the story. After all, his love is so amazing, so divine that it demands our lives, our soul, our all. So together we'll press forward. Together for good, together for progress, together to end hunger. The kingdom of God is here, and there is room at the table for everyone, but only when we make space for all people who are in need. Jesus calls us to step out of our comfort zones and move beyond our ideological divides to stand with the dispossessed, because where they are, Jesus is. And where Jesus is, that's where we're called to be. Thank you.
I was told that I had to come up after that because I'm not supposed to cry. So I've been fighting that all night. Our staff has been wagering with how many times Jeremy would cry, so that was awesome. Thank you. Thank you.